Hey, it's Dan from the Salty Sea, and I'm here with a Warcry rundown for the Lizardmen. Quick note on the break between videos. I live in the Twin Cities, where a man was brutally murdered by people sworn to serve and protect him. So real-life issues and civic engagement have taken precedence over Warcry lately, but I'm still playing the game, and I'm excited to record more videos. So, Aztec Space Dinosaurs, who ride other dinosaurs. Some of their big friends shoot laser beams. What's not to love about Seraphon? Summarizing the playstyle with this faction is complicated because with so many options, it's easy to create warbands that play completely differently. The only thing they have in common is that Seraphon are much more interested in picking one important fight and winning it than they are in getting all their units into combat across the board. So let's draw out some pros and cons. Like I just mentioned, this warband has a ton of options. You have an incredible range of units to play with. Yes, a lot of them are bad, but you can make your Seraphon band totally unique to your brand of play. Now another thing is, you have great board control here. You have a ton of good movement options, some decent range 2 infantry, and a really good spam unit named Skinks. Skinks are really aggressively costed, and they do some interesting things. They're pretty powerful, and they're probably the best unit in the warband. Some of the drawbacks, well, the biggest one is the lack of hammers. Saurus and Ripperdactyl leaders do respectable damage when using abilities, but it's just not as much damage as the options that other warbands have available to them. And you can never get 2 of them in one list because your only real damage dealers are your leaders. So your non-leader units generally don't want to be in combat. You need to pick 1 or 2 important fights with this warband and win those using abilities, and then avoid the rest. So I just had Skinks under pros. Why do I have them under cons as well? Well, spammable pea shooters can make for unfun games. I'll get into it later, but by far the most competitive option in the army involves a warband full of Skinks that just stand there and roll dice without really moving around much or creating much of a dynamic scene for your games. So if I just complained about them, how about I just get into them right now? There's 3 versions of Skinks, but only 2 of them matter. They're the strongest competitive unit in the warband. One quick thing to note is that the version everyone plays in AOS, which is blowpipes and shields, doesn't actually exist in Warcry. So if your reason for playing Warcry is to serve as an entry point into Age of Sigmar, you'll hit a bit of a speed bump there. Now that said, blowpipes and clubs are still useful in the big game. You'll lose out on the shield, but you can still function with an Age of Sigmar army fine that way, and just 10 of them still working for you. So let's talk about them in Warcry. They have great damage per point for a ranged unit. They're spammable, right? At just 65 points, you can put a ton of them out there and get total board control. They're also great at objective play because they can sit on one objective and just shoot the other one because range 12 is huge on this table. They're also great in unit hunter missions because, again, you can cover the entire board with them and your opponent just can't hide. So if they need to protect one important unit, they're not going to be able to. The club and shield skinks have actually the best melee damage in the warband. It's still lower than the highest damage units in other warbands, like say Slaanesh has demonettes that will do more damage, but they're really useful given this army's general problems with dealing damage. Now we'll get into this in the ability section, but attack, then do nimble retreat feels so powerful and a little broken that I actually had to look it up when I did it to make sure that you were allowed to use abilities after your attacks. It can be a real problem for your opponents. Quick word on the spear and shield skinks. They're just overcosted for what they do, and they do less damage than the blowpipes at a shorter range with a higher points cost. Yes, they have an extra point of toughness, but ranged units aren't meant for combat, so the toughness is completely unnecessary. Don't use them. Now, Saurus Knights. Every time I build a list, I come back to these. Even though they might not be that good, they're the best in the game at one of the least valuable things to have in the game, which is a mid-costed unit that doesn't do a lot of damage but is pretty survivable. Units in this game that cost between 80 and 130 points, they just have a higher burden of proof because they're not spammable like the cheap units, and they don't use abilities so well that they just crush with one activation, the way some of the expensive units do. That said, a tank score of 9.0 on a 6 move unit is just incredible. These guys are great at, well, running away, which is only useful sometimes, but they're really good at it for their points. So yes, you'd rather have an expensive unit in that role, but there's nothing more efficient at it than these guys. So to get to your flyers, pterodons come in 2 varieties, but you only need to think about one. Seriously, why are the spear models in this game so overcosted? Am I missing something about this terrible weapon profile? Oh well. Bolus riders have interesting flexibility, but they're really fragile. You can choose to use their charge damage to get in close and then one-shot chaff with how much damage they do. Or you can run across the board and harass things with the bolus, staying 3 inches away so that if they want to come back at you, they have to waste a movement. The Ripperdactyls give up a ranged attack and a little bit of movement range for an extra point of toughness. In my opinion, move 12 versus move 10 isn't that big a deal given the size of most boards that you'll be playing on, but your results may vary there. The extra durability means that there's a few more fights that they can win, which actually gives you more options for the surgical strike nature of how they play. The thing with both of these is that they have a lot of tactical play, but one mistake will just blow them up, and they're pretty expensive units, so that hurts you a lot. I would never play 2 just because of how inefficient they are for their points, but 1 is totally viable, especially with the abilities you get to use, and maybe even past viable and into good. So, Saurus. Saurus are all pretty slow at 4-inch movement, and they do fine damage for this warband, but not really that good compared to what other factions are capable of. So let's start with club warriors. Min-maxing lists, you'll often find room for 1 club warrior. The clubs are only worth it if you would have added a skink with a club, but you actually had some extra points left over, so why not just add the extra little bit of durability? They're a fine, cheap backbone unit. Now, if you're going to do them with spears, it's really just a worse version of Saurus Guard. So let's talk about the guards. They're pretty useful elite infantry, and the 2-inch reach is pretty good for them. Now with the Saurus warriors with spears, they just don't do enough damage to matter. But the guard makes the 2-inch reach useful because of the respectable damage output, which makes the opponent not want to ignore them. So they cost almost twice what a spear warrior costs, but they do much more than double the damage, and they're almost twice as durable, so it's usually worth it over spear warriors. They also get an extra 5 1/4 damage out of a tearing bite activation, which is really useful and can create sort of a zone of control thing that I'll talk more about in the leader section. So, who's going to be in charge? It's too bad you can't use your frog wizards here because thematically they're one of my favorite things in the army. But either way, your leader options are interesting. Let's start with the skink. It has the highest damage efficiency of the leaders, but it can't use the sweet abilities. So your 25% damage buff from Onslaught is your only source of burst damage if you take it. It's almost as fragile point for point as the flyers, but without their ability to, well, fly. It has decent mobility, but the only reason I'd use one is if I were aiming for the sort of total skink spam degeneracy that you can do with this warband. Now, with the skink leader, you can get to the maximum of 15 units with this warband, but the advantage of that over a 12-unit warband is not nearly as big as the advantage that a 12-unit warband has over a 9-unit warband, so I'm not sure it's worth it to do that compared to a few of your other options. Now let's get to the Saurus leaders. All of their leader options are pretty tanky. Their warrior has a 6.9 score, the guard leader has a 7.1, and the knight leader has a 7.9. Now the Saurus guard leader using Tearing Bite will average 13 damage against toughness 4 for just one activation. So at a 6-inch threat range due to their 2-inch reach, it's pretty scary. The threat of it alone, combined with its high survivability, creates a huge zone of control wherever you place him. Regular Saurus guard have this too, but the guard leader just takes it up a huge notch. So don't be afraid to double move him somewhere in round 1, along with a skink or a Saurus Knight bodyguard, and then you can just create this entire pie plate of zone control advantage in round 2. My last video had a little bit of talk on ranges as well, so this is me promising to do a range value comparison video in the future. I think it'll help to see some pictures of actual boards to check out the tactics that are available. Just know that the Saurus Guard leader with the 2-inch reach is really helpful here. Now, as much as I love that unit, I do find myself using Saurus Knight leaders just as often. The mobile survivability that they offer is really important for warbands that want to rely on skink clouds to do their damage, and since skink clouds are the most powerful thing that this warband has, the synergy ends up so that you're pretty tempted to use the Knight leader. I'll share a list later that uses this. Now getting to the flyers. Neither flyer is efficient when looking at damage or tankiness, but as long as you only take one, they make up for it with their mobility. Remember, this warband is great when it's picking one fight, winning it, and getting out. And the flyers really help with that. The Ripper leader does more damage than the Pterodon one and has better survivability, but the 3-inch reach on the Pterodon has really interesting tactical applications. You can charge a wounded unit with the Pterodon triple ability to finish it off, and then you can use the range attack to attack a completely different unit that then has to waste an activation to approach you to counterattack. That's just one of the kinds of things that you can do with it, which is really helpful. And then also, remember to use terrain to position your flyers where they can't be attacked, but then they can move once and then strike when they get there. Flying ignoring terrain is great. Now let's get into the abilities. The abilities with this warband really do change how you want to build your lists. First is Nimble Retreat. It's a double, and it feels a little broken, honestly. It means that an enemy fighter can never double move onto one of your skinks to lock it down, because you can always just Nimble Retreat, and then they aren't going to be able to fight you next round. It makes kiting really easy, and it's really punishing to slow warbands. It also kind of increases damage output, since it frees up an action that you then use to attack. So if you have blowpipes, you can Nimble Retreat to get out of being killed next turn, and then you still get to shoot twice. Or if you have the club skinks, you attack, and then Nimble Retreat to avoid being killed. Now, skinks are really fragile, but all of a sudden you get to attack a whole bunch and use more damage output without worrying about them getting blown up. Now let's get to the other double, Voracious Appetite. This ability is perfect for the Ripperdactyls, and without it they'd be near useless, which is part of why I say that you should only take one, because you're really only going to use this double once. Now, on a 3-up, it's better than Onslaught if it's a move then attack. But it's still on a 6 better than Onslaught even for a double attack. So It also is more flexible than Onslaught, since Onslaught you have to commit to your attack before you use it. Here, you can just wait to see if the Ripper killed its target before committing this. So it doesn't actually compete with Nimble Retreat the way you'd think it would, since they're both doubles. So having Ripperdactyls and Skinks, they won't always step on each other's toes with the dice. The first triple is Meteoric Barrage. It lets a Pterodon one-shot a chaff unit from 13 inches away, given how much they do in melee. So it's perfect for finishing off wounded units, or again, taking out little tiny ones. But Pterodons are super fragile, so don't do this, and don't be reckless if you can't take out the target. Remember, again, Seraphon don't want to just smash. They want to pick 1 or 2 fights, win them, and then avoid the rest. This is unlike other units that have this exact same ability to deal damage when they finish a movement 1 inch away, such as, say, Khorne Blood Crushers, which are happy to double move, deal damage, and then wait till the next round before they actually start fighting. Here, if you do that with Pterodons, your Pterodon's going to be gone by the time the next round starts. Now, Tearing Bite is a huge damage buff for certain Saurus. For example, the Saurus Guard Leader gets 7 damage out of it in 1 attack. Now, it only buffs 1 attack, unlike, say, Onslaught, which will buff 2. So it rewards situations where you're moving onto something and then attacking it. Something like a Saurus Knight Leader, where you have the good movement, you've shot something with Skinks already, and now you're moving in to finish it off with the really big damage buff from Tearing Bite. Now these 2 triples mean that if you take a Saurus Leader, you probably want to avoid a Pterodon, and if you take a Pterodon Leader, the expensive Saurus, like the Guards, and maybe even the Knights, probably aren't worth it. These 2 triples really do step on each other's toes because they are what makes each of these units viable. So I would never take a Pterodon if I had Saurus. Finally, Wrath of the Old Ones is a great ability that still isn't as good as Rampage most of the time. It's only good if you're already locked in combat, which this warband doesn't always want to do. Now that said, Flyers and Saurus Guard use it best, because it's a bigger buff to things that each attack already does a lot of damage. So keep it in mind if you have a Flyer leader or a Saurus Guard leader that might accidentally end up starting off its activation locked in combat. Now for some lists. One great thing about the Dino Boys is that there's a mind-blowing number of ways to combine the units in this warband. I'm going to keep it to 4 lists today, but know that I'm barely scratching the surface here. So the smorgasbord. A little bit of everything. If I had a full collection of Seraphon, this is the list I'd take to the weekend game store. As is, I proxy a Slaan for the Ripper and a Sunblood for the Guard, but then I still have a blast. You have mobility, durability, and not much damage, but you can put real damage in one place every round. Whether or not you choose the correct place will determine if you win or not. This list has a ton of tactical play, and it's also one of the few that really cares about the deployment phase. The YouTuber Rito has a great video about hammer, dagger, and shield implications, and I suggest you watch that. This warband really takes advantage of some of the things that he outlines in that video. Now the shield here has more than half of the point power in this warband, because your shield is most likely going to be on the field round 1, and in a lot of deployments it's right in the middle of the action. So it has the Ripperdactyl, and I went into Ripper tactics earlier, but this list enables them really well and rewards you for doing them correctly. Now the Saurus Guard also does a mini version of the Guard Leader's zone control thing, which is why you really want it in your shield, so that it's most likely going to be there round 1, so that you can create your zone of control in round 2. Now the dagger and the hammer, those 2 aren't always likely to be on the field round 1. So every unit in them is move 6 so that it can catch up into the action when it needs to. Also, you'll see each group has one really survivable unit. I'll do a video on this, but a lot of missions incentivize you to have 3 survivable units, but no more than that. So this really helps you in that regard. Finally, you've got 3 blowpipe skinks, because that's your best unit in the warband. But also you only have 3 blowpipe skinks, because you want to keep your friends. This list doesn't exploit the game mechanics quite as well as Seraphon are capable of. So if you get matched against a weaker warband, you won't just blow them off the table. That said, if you get matched against your local spike, the tactical depth at your disposal here will let you give them a real game. Now, if we're min-maxing for competitive play, I want to only take the units that are best in class at what they do, and those are Knights and Skinks in my opinion. 9 Skinks lets you have total board control. You'd have 3 in each deployment, and so chances are pretty good that your opponent's most important model will be in range of at least 6 of them, which means 24 shots doing 1 on a 5 and 4 on a 6. That said, they are not very fun. They just stand there, shooting, not moving, and just fishing for 6s. But the damage does really add up. Now the Knights, they provide tanky objective grabbers, or mobile kites in hunter-killer and treasure missions, which is really important because your skinks are just standing still the whole time. So the total damage here is low, and the Knight leader using Tearing Bite is your only source of burst damage. But again, this matches the Seraphon Warcry motto, which is pick one fight, win it, and get out. This warband executes that plan with scary efficiency and better than any other list I've tried. Between the Knight leader and the Skinks, you can take out almost every leader in the game in round 1. 30 damage to a toughness 5 unit is not only possible, but pretty close to average. Now, one thing to note with Seraphon is that the huge variety of options at your disposal means that they're not cheap to collect. The super competitive option from last slide is actually cheaper than a start collecting box. Just get some skinks and some knights from eBay. But these start collecting boxes bridge better into AOS. Plus, you get a big monster dinosaur as a painting project. Also, that competitive list is not that fun to play, so unless you really want to win tournaments, I wouldn't jump into it. Part of why this video took so long was supporting important protests happening in my city, but another part of it is that testing blowpipe skink combos really isn't that fun. They will sap your desire to play this otherwise awesome game. Now, the start collecting skink box. It gives you sweet flyers and a cute little Bulbasaur to cheer on your team. Remember when I said you should only run 1 flyer? Well, here you can toss that out the window. Now, you have a ton of the skink spam that I've already said I don't like, but you can use it to support these flyers and really focus on how fun they are and how much tactical play you can get from them. Again, they're not very efficient, but that's why you have all this unit spam revolving around them. Now, that list has a lot of scalpels and fragile units. Skinks themselves are just wet tissue paper armor. So that means this warband is really unforgiving for mistakes, but really powerful if used correctly. Just a note again that nobody plays club skinks in Age of Sigmar, so a tiny sacrifice here, making 3 of them like that in your box. So now the start collecting Saurus box. Now the site Lustria Online has an incredible guide to conversions for the start collecting Saurus box. And you're going to need to do that because it doesn't actually come with Saurus Guard, but you can use the Old Blood to convert a Saurus Guard leader. And if you magnetize it, you don't have to give up the Carnosaur build, which is really nice because the other one with the Skink Oracle riding it, not as good. Now, back to Warcry, this list gives you really durable zone control. Remember the guard leader plus tearing bite combo. That's used really well here. Saurus warriors are the backbone of this list, and they're fine infantry. And if skinks didn't exist, you'd run 3 or 4 in every list. A lot of warbands would absolutely love to have Saurus warrior equivalents, so don't feel bad about running it here if this is the set of Seraphon that you own. So there you have it, Seraphon and Warcry. I'm sorry if I sounded a little negative on the backbone unit of this warband, but I really do like all of the more elite units in the group. The Flyers are a ton of fun, Saurus Guard are a ton of fun, so let me know in the comments if you've played them and what you think of Skink Spam, what you think of the tactical options you get with the Flyers and with the Saurus. I hope you try this warband out, and I hope you have a great time playing it. Until then, may all your rolls be crits.